Due to the very small nature of the agenda, we'll spend hours of deliberation on each item, not. I just wanted to, before we start, welcome, got one or two councillors to come. Chairman, do you want to sit up? Before we get started, I just want your indulgence as to process today. We've got a very full agenda this morning and this afternoon, and I just wondered whether I could have your indulgence about taking a number of the reports as read, with the proviso that, and if you can record any questions you've got on those as read papers. We've got another opportunity at council to pose those, so the opportunity's not lost, but I'm just appealing to our the obligations we've got today and the speed we're needing to get through, just to limit the level of questioning. But Councillor Whaley.
Thank you, Chair. Which particular papers are you talking about?
Well, there are a number of reporting papers that are of limit, or they're not decision papers, and they are essentially for information. But we'll come to those and we'll make a call as to how we want to treat them as we go. But, so I'll get going with the welcome. And Piri, I wonder whether you can, if you want to open for us, please.
Kia ora tēnā tātai. Te tuatahi ko tā koe mihi kia tātou e hui tahi nei. Me ki rei nā tau mahatanga kei rungi a tātou nei pukahiwi, acknowledging the assembly of the people that are here for this committee and for these discussions this morning, and also those things that we might collectively share in terms of burdens or those who have passed on. Kia hoki mai ki he inui mā tātou, and our karakia for this morning. It's the one that we've been using previously, and if you're aware of the words and the content, please join with me. It's called Whakataka Te Hau. Oh, we're going to put the words up on the screen. Wonderful. There we go. Please join with me. I'm going to do the part on the left, te reo, and then we're going to do the part on the right, the translation. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai, e hi a ke ana te atakura, e tio, e huka, e hauhu, ti hei mauri ora. Well done. Bit louder on the English part, please. Cease the winds from the west, cease the winds from the south. Let the breeze blow over the land, let the breeze blow over the ocean. Let the red-tipped dawn come with a sharpened ear, a touch of frost, the promise of a glorious day. Tēnā tātou, kia ora.
Many thanks, Billy. So welcome everyone. We've got our guest from Hawke's Bay Tourism here, waiting to come and talk to us today, and they'll be essentially first up on the agenda to accommodate George and Co. And we've also got Dave Simmons on the boards here with us, so I'm sure he'll have a few things to tell us about the state of the industry. So we've got those, and we'll have Hawke's Bay Tourism up as after we've done up to agenda item 5. After agenda item 5, are there any notices? No notices. Are there any apologies? No apologies. We're all here. Councillor Barker's not far away. Conflicts of interest. Are there any conflicts of interest? Mr. Waka. Sorry,
Hawke's Bay Māori Tourism, New Zealand Māori Tourism.
you've got a conflict there?
I don't know.
It's up to you to decide whether.
Well, I suppose there possibly is, yeah.
All right, well, that's noted. So we'll go to the minutes of the meeting of the 3rd of October. I assume everyone's got those minutes. Are there any corrections to the minutes? corrections? Can I have a mover, please, that those minutes be accepted?
Happy to do so.
Councillor Graham Paku. Been moved and seconded the minutes be accepted. All those in favour will say aye. Aye. All those against will say no. Carried. Are there any matters arising from those minutes? Remember that we had the discussion kahutia, which we've got a discussion next council meeting on. Ethical investment policy. Notification of water take resource consents. No other matters. Councillor Hewitt.
Question for you, James. I'm wondering about the significance of the kahutia decision, given that we have had a councillor declare a pecuniary interest and then vote on the matter now that these minutes have been confirmed, and the significance of this in the decision itself, given that you've previously advised to heed caution in this space.
The final decision to invest has not yet been taken, so the decision that was voted on was to seek further advice, essentially from the council's solicitor, on a range of matters that were raised as of concern to councillors, and so we're currently awaiting that advice. I would suggest that issues with respect to the conflict of interest relate more directly to the final decision with whether or not to proceed, and that's still a decision yet to be taken, so that lies before us.
Now I'll progress to the follow-up items. That's on page 3, agenda item 4.
I haven't got any.
Let's take us through that. Is that James?
Chair, I think the status comments cover all of those off. A number of the items there are on the agenda for today, so unless there are any questions, we'd just like those to be noted, follow-ups to be accepted.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Bailey.
Follow-up number 5, the living wage promotion will be specifically raised in Hawke's Bay Tourism's next report. I'll wait with bated breath the presentation of the report when that eventually comes later on the agenda.
Sure. All right. Can I have a mover that the follow-up report be accepted? Thank you, Councillor Bevan. Councillor Wilson. All those in favour of receiving the report, say aye. Aye. Those against, say no. Carried. We now move to items not on the agenda. Are there any items that anyone wants to raise that are currently not on the agenda? Thank you for your consideration of that. Now, as I said earlier, we've got a very full agenda, and I'm proposing that we, if you like, limit our, if you like, questioning and/or consideration of agenda items 10, the report back from the Finance Subcommittee, the item 14, the response to water management internal audit recommendations, future operational performance report, our item 15, and the PMO pilot update. If there's no objection to, if you like, restricting our consideration of those items given their nature and the issues we've got in front of us today in terms of timing.
Personally, I think we just get on with the agenda.
Yep,
we
that's
get through it.
fine.
Just say
I'm
to
just giving
councillors that we've got some time, so I don't want to see any unnecessary restrictions on questions. I think that would be wrong. But we should avoid wasting time. Let's just box on.
Right, thank you for your sage words, Councillor. We'll move now to agenda item 9, which is the Hawke's Bay Tourism Update, and I wonder whether we have George, Annie and Dave come forward, please, to the table. Welcome, George. Annie. Thank you very much. See you. Tom, do you want to lead out on the...
If that's okay, Chair, thank you. Just in the interest of time, I don't propose to run through the paper in depth. I just really want to make 3 observations at the outset, and just note that we do have sort of co-authors of this paper, Mandy Sharp and Trudy, down the back available to answer any detailed questions about the funding models of the paper. But I just want to make 3 quick observations in relation to this paper, which actually comes as an outcome of the request made by Council through the long-term plan when it made its funding decision in respect of Hawke's Bay tourism to undertake through this 3-year cycle a review of the funding model for Hawke's Bay tourism. And so this paper is, in respects, brings together some of the work that we've been doing in the background and proposing steps forward. So there is some analysis in here about the current funding model and how that's working and who's bearing the burden of this rate through the current targeted rate. A part of this review, the terms of reference of this review, was a consideration of a regional bed tax or levy. And I'd just like to make the observation that it's the nature of that kind of funding vehicle that necessarily requires this to be a regional debate. In particular, a levy will require, it will be a tool that would be available to all councils. And so as all councils have expressed a strong interest in Hawke's Bay tourism and its ongoing role, we have consulted with the Leaders Forum about the fact that we're undertaking this review, and we have received quite strong support from that forum to make sure that this review doesn't occur in isolation of the wider regional context. And so the third point to make is that the tourism and the funding of tourism across the board is currently of significant interest at a national level, and I think partly Dave is going to be able to speak to that today. So the overall takeaway is that this funding review probably does have to happen in a wider context, not only just around this table, and so that's the overall recommendation of the paper, that we proceed with our own analysis but also engage regionally and take account of what's happening nationally. So with that, I'm happy to hand over to George.
Thanks, Tom. Kia ora, everyone. Just thought we'd add a couple of elements to it. I just want to talk briefly about the national scene, and then I'm going to ask Dave, who's a member of our board and is the Chief Operating Officer at THL, to talk a little bit about the international market that it's also dealing with exactly the same thing, and that's how do you go about funding destination marketing organisations like ours. One of the issues that we've been dealing with all along is while we're looking at the Hawke's Bay model and how we can sustainably fund what it is we do, there's also been a bit of a frustration, I think, in the national sense that every other region in the country is doing exactly the same thing. And in a way, it was sort of abandoned to us to find our own solutions. Well, that's changing, and it's changing quite significantly. Annie is on the steering committee with a small group of the key regions leading the direction on this, which is being done with Local Government New Zealand. They're putting out a request for information early next year to set up a review project that is going to look at what the best solutions to this might be. We do see that there's a gathering of momentum behind this initiative from all of the tourism industry, and I think some of the previous objections that have been voiced against bed taxes and that sort of thing are starting to be softened, because I think we all want to find a solution, and in the simple terms, we don't want to spend the rest of this time simply arguing about where this funding's coming from. We need a sustainable funding mix that actually works for all regions within New Zealand. The worst possible outcome is that we have a whole mix of different things happening around, and if you look at some of the big operators we might have to partner in funding this, they're not going to be interested in having different rules for different regions. So we're looking at a national solution that can actually be applied regionally. It looks as if there's a lot of momentum gathering around that at the moment, and we expect to see some action in the new year. So I think this paper here really sets us up really well. We are in a leadership position as a region within that national debate, and which is where we want to stay. I think we're going to see some action on this next year at last. I just thought it'd be interesting. Dave gets a perspective of what happens internationally, and we tend to look inwardly and think, well, this is a problem. It's also a problem everywhere in the world, and there are all sorts of solutions. So, Dave, I just wondered if you might give a brief outline.
Yeah, thanks, George. Firstly, thanks for having us this morning. As part of the sort of, I guess, remit from yourselves to challenge the funding model, we have kicked off and undertaken some fairly substantive sort of research and benchmarking and engagement beyond the region to look at what other cities and areas are doing. As George has said, this is not a problem that Hawke's Bay is trying to solve on its own. And as part of that, we've done two exercises, actually. We've done a sort of research benchmarking exercise around leading cities and regions in the world that have been trying to grapple with this exercise. And it was a particularly interesting exercise. There's a paper we've produced off the back of that. And the simple insight into it is there's no silver bullet in this area. Everyone grapples with it, whether you're talking Paris, Barcelona, New York, LA, etc. All of these large cities have been grappling with how to I guess, get their arms around the changing dynamic of the tourism industry, and particularly with the advent of sort of asset sharing and peer-to-peer marketplaces. All sorts of different models have been sort of experimented with, and what's very, very clear is that when you start getting into fragmented models, the effectiveness of them becomes diminished fundamentally, and you start getting cost of regulation, compliance, etc., that undermines the effectiveness of it. So really interesting exercise. As I say, the key thing in there is that there is no single solution that would be deemed to be best practice. What does begin to surface is that those cities that have got traction, those cities and regions that have got traction, have done it in a collaborative way with the industry and the partners or the parts of the distribution chain that need to be actively involved. If they've tried to kind of collect revenue at the back end, it hasn't particularly worked well, but where they've engaged and collaborated with the industry on a wider basis, it's actually had some degree of traction. So that was the key outtake from that exercise. In addition to that, you've also, through contacts through Tourism Holdings, been able to create dialogue with a chap called Matt Curtis. Matt, up until 18 months ago, was Vice President of Government Affairs for Expedia, and prior to that was led the Government Affairs for Home Away, which is one of the sharing platforms that's comparable to Airbnb out of the States. Incredibly interesting talking to Matt on the basis that he's been leading the sort of engagement from the platform side with cities and regions around the world. And since leaving Expedia, he's actually set up his own consultancy business based out of Austin, Texas, to advise cities and regions on how to engage with particularly the growth of the sharing economy, but also those funding models that can feed back in. And we've had a couple of conversations with Matt now. And again, the interesting thing that came out very, very clearly was there is no singular answer. Every region, every country region has its own challenges, unique challenges. But the other very clear thing, which George just touched on, is smaller regions trying to go it alone and find their own solutions is particularly ineffective. And in fact, he cited examples in California where, again, some of the smaller regions had bolted off and sort of implemented their own solutions, and they're actually now back-wheeling out of that and coordinating a more of a regional, wider regional play. So that was kind of a very interesting insight in talking to Matt. But again, the key thing, his very strong view when he looked at New Zealand, from afar looking at New Zealand, was that New Zealand absolutely has to have a singular framework in terms of enhancing sort of tourism income, if you like, and putting that back. Very, very strong view on that. Thought it'd be mad for parts of New Zealand to go it alone, purely on the basis that platforms wouldn't engage. New Zealand in its own right is a limited sized market for some of these guys. If you then break that down further, the willingness for parts of the industry to engage that would be active in terms of supporting it would be diminished pretty heavily. So that came out very, very strongly in both the research work we've done and the engagement we've had with sort of what would probably be one of the sort of leading voices globally in this space.
Great, thanks.
I think just to add to that, Dave, the good news in that is if you get it right, it covers your funding.
Correct.
It's actually a good solution, but you've just got to get it right. So really, look, that's us. We didn't think we'd trouble you with PowerPoint today. The paper's there. We thought we'd take questions. Annie, do you want to add anything at this point?
Happy to have some questions.
So that's us. Thank you.
Someone want to run through the paper very briefly to highlight anything?
I've got a question, Chair.
I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, take questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mr. Walker.
Thank you for the presentation. My comment is it's very monocultural. You know, the unique value proposition for New Zealand is Māori, and it's a well undeveloped area in Hawke's Bay. I'm speaking as a ratepayer and a member of the Māori committee, a Māori member of the RPC. We put rates into Hawke's Bay tourism. There is a note there at the end about invites Hawke's Bay tourism to better support Māori tourism. We're 20% of the population. I believe that 20% of effort should go into assisting Māori tourism. Your view in terms of what's going on around the world. I think the significant thing that you haven't pointed out is that our competition is Rotorua, South Island, and our big focus should be on how do we get people to turn the steering wheel to come over this side. And to do that, we need to be collaborating with the East Coast more, develop some well-factor attractions to get people to come here. I would like to know what your key performance indicators are to so that Māori can measure whether or not you are using our money appropriately in terms of what you are going to do to assist grow Māori tourism. But yeah, those are my main questions.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Is there any response to that? The focus at the minute is on the funding model as opposed to the product.
That's about marketing emphasis and effort, which I'm happy to discuss, but I don't think that's
quite where we are today. Yeah.
So I'm focused on outcomes.
Well,
I've got a
it's
right
okay,
to
but
ask-
we're talking about the funding model, Mr. Walker. So are there any questions on the funding model?
Sorry, I thought we were taking questions on the paper.
Well, the issue, we've got in front of us the funding issue, and they're just addressing that, Councillor Bailey. If you've got a question on that, it's fine, but let's follow a bit of a
Doesn't the
logic to
funding have
this.
to be justified?
I'm quite happy to, but I have questions other than those on the
No, that's
funding.
fine. I'm asking if there are any questions on the funding model at the moment, Councillor Bailey. Have you got a question on the funding model? Councillor Wilson.
Just in regard to, thank you, Chair, through you, just in regard to LGNZ, there's always been pushback from industry. You sort of touched on it, but can you elaborate? What will be different this time if LGNZ get behind a nationwide bed tax of some sort? Will industry, through its various organisations, push back?
We understand that they're actually far more inclined to do that now than they were.
Sorry, push back or not push back?
Not push back.
Right, okay.
There's always been a real reluctance by the national bodies for a bed tax, and I think that issue is softened now on the basis that everybody said, look, we've got to find a solution here, and we're probably going to have to get over it. And so our understanding is that there'll be a lot more support for local government New Zealand's position on this now than there was, say, 12 months ago.
Thank you.
Councillor Bevan.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm looking at paragraph 33 and 34 on page 82 of our papers, where you talk about possibly raising $2 million annually, which would require a 2.5% regional bed tax. And you go on to say that this would apply to bookings made in New Zealand. Is the implication of that if somebody is offshore and makes a booking through Airbnb, you can't capture them?
No, that's perhaps a little bit of a misstep. It would be applied to anybody. When they're paying their bill,
Yeah.
it will come up.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That's fine, because for the life of me, I couldn't see why it wouldn't apply to anybody that used one of these websites
Totally.
to book. Okay, so that's fine, that's a clarification. So if I understand the overview of this paper and your comments on it, you're basically suggesting that the best model for us to adopt here might be a combination of some form of bed tax along with some sort of a targeted rate primarily aimed at commercial. And I presume that at some point in time you'll come back to us with a proposal on what that mix might look like and why it should be, how it's justified. In regard to the targeted rate, clearly we have a problem because if you apply a targeted rate to commercial properties across the board, some commercial entities don't benefit at all from increased tourism, but others will benefit. Are we able to target in a way that actually picks up those people who are beneficiaries of increased tourism, or is that, maybe that's actually a question for
That's probably a
our
question
staff
for the-
rather
yeah.
than...
So
Rather than you guys.
Trudy down, and feel free to stand up and speak to it, but Trudy's nodding in the back, down the back.
Right, okay.
Trudy, can you come forward to a microphone since we're live streaming, please?
I'll come up in front.
Yeah, come up there.
Thanks.
Through Chair. What's happening, can I just say what's happening through New Zealand at present with other councils is they're actually targeting the Airbnbs through a targeted rate. And so by doing that, they're moving them from a residential to a commercial. So the problem is identifying the Airbnbs and moving them across, and then they will get a targeted rate specifically to them. And so the movement would move across more commercial than residential. But the problem is identifying them and targeting it. Now, different councils are doing different things. Auckland is doing it on per night. Rotorua is doing it on a zone. Different areas are doing it different ways. So there's a lot of work, but there's definitely a way that we can do a targeted rate for Airbnb type of situation.
But more broadly, I think Councillor Bevan's referring to whether or not we can have a subcategory within commercial for accommodation providers, for example, or tourist attraction operators.
We can do whatever we choose to do, however we do it.
So you're able to categorise within the commercial rate sector in Hawke's Bay, you're able to categorise and target.
Yes.
Right,
Yep,
so we can actually come up with something that overall will be transparent and fair to...
Absolutely.
Part of the, I suppose, the reality of it is that 70% of tourism spend doesn't occur within the direct industry as such. It occurs in the supportive industry. So
Which is the reason why you're suggesting a targeted commercial rate component, which makes sense to me.
also talking about the whole idea of using targeted rates to attract B&B, a far simpler solution would be for the platform itself to take a percentage at the time of booking and distribute it.
Yep.
So that's why, you'll only get that in a national environment, and that would be far better. And I think what we need to do is find out what would be the take that we could get from that method and the bed tax method, and does that need a rate top-up at that point? It may not. So that would be the simple thing.
And I'm also assuming that we talk about Airbnb, but in fact there are a number of other websites.
Correct.
And I'm assuming that we're talking about all of them.
And I think just the other thing to point out there, the difference between the sharing economy and the commercial sector is that inventory set's constantly moving. So it's not that you've got 600 properties, or you might have 600 properties as of today, but as of tomorrow it might be 650, the day after it might be 580, and actually trying to get compliance around that. That's certainly the insight from the research we did, is trying to get compliance around that is very, very difficult because it's a constantly moving target.
I think using rates on properties that offer Airbnb beds is a really clunky way to do it. There's much easier ways to do it, I'm sure.
Well, people have looked at the whole idea of, what is it, more than 20 nights a year, or half of it is an Airbnb or not. And of course, how do you police it? And that's the problem.
Well, that was going to be my question to Trudy as to, is there any compliance regime or registration requirement for an Airbnb provider? Council to local authorities?
No,
Not you're aware of?
I don't know.
So the only way of picking up the traffic is through the websites, and that can be a changeable feast.
Correct.
A new one comes up, springs up tomorrow. So
And what's clear is the sites won't provide that
Provide the-
data to you.
the
Yeah, that's
information,
quite,
yeah.
quite
a
a
really
clear
difficult
position.
scenario. Yeah. Any other questions on the funding model? I've just got one in terms of the comment around different entities, organisations doing their own, or different local authorities, municipalities doing their own thing, and getting concerted action on that. In the discussions with our own local authorities, what was the appetite for collective action? I mean, Hastings is different to Napier, etc. So what's the feedback we're getting from our own local authorities on?
It's pretty positive. I mean, Tom can probably report on the forum the other day, but in discussions we've already had with councils, they want a regional view of this.
Regional view?
Yeah.
And does that apply to their own separate event funding and
We haven't gone as
management?
far as that. I think the other piece that we're looking at is a tourism strategy or regional visitor strategy for Hawke's Bay, and I think a lot of that will come out of that conversation. That would be the ideal platform.
Councillor Bailey.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It is a funding question, so it's all good. When I look at paragraph 22, you're talking about web listing members paying $100 plus just each year. Then I come down to paragraph 25, and you talk about a number of these businesses would struggle to pay more than $100 per annum than they pay now. Is that because they're genuinely these turnover is that small that they cannot afford to pay any more than $100 per annum, or is it because they don't see any value in Hawke's Bay tourism and they're unwilling to pay any more than they are now?
Well, that's what we charge them currently. Some of them are one-person operations, and a lot of them, in addition to paying that, they will also provide us with in-kind support. So that might be a cash contribution, but the in-kind support is a lot more. So it just depends on the operator. But the industry is made up predominantly of one or two-person businesses. So
And people who are unable to contribute more than $100 a year.
some of them, yeah. They may operate their business for 6 months of a 12-month period and hope to make enough money over the summer to last through winter. But these are all things we've talked about in an industry-wide survey, and these are questions that we will tackle in that survey to see what and how we can increase that figure.
Are there any other matters, or just before we go to that, is there anything we can do as council to support the next steps on this? For example, our chair attends the mayoral forum, so he needs to be under instruction as to what to do, and what else? Or what else can we do to support what we're heading?
Chairman, I think the key thing here is that, number one, the region has to be unified. And we have that, in other words, that we are speaking as for all of the territorial authorities when we're looking at a solution here. And we have to stay totally engaged in helping lead the national debate. And Annie's on that committee. And in a way, I think what we've been dealing with as a group here in this region is helping lead that debate nationally, because we do represent the sort of mid-regions who are all struggling with this thing. So the key thing is that we have the support of all of the territorial authorities here for one approach, and that we push it as hard as we can in the national environment. And let's see how far we can get this thing in the first 3 months of next year.
And we've had great collaboration from the council team so far to help get this paper up and running, and I think that's the way we want to continue.
So,
I'll just go to Councillor Belford and then come
A
back.
further question today, just for clarification, aren't there really two advocacy processes involved here? One is the channel that is formulating an industry position. The other is a channel that's formulating a local government position. Is that not true? And so we need to be fully engaged in both of those. Annie and the Industry Association presumably are aligned in terms of lobbying for a industry position, which we are implicitly endorsing as a national bed tax position, correct? That's where that process is headed. Local government-wise, presumably the same position would be taken by the chief executive and mayors and so forth. Is that, Mr. Chairman of ours, Rex Graham, is that our position? Are we advocating that, or are we expecting somebody else to do that, or how's that going to actually happen?
Do you want me to answer that, Tom? I'm looking.
Yeah, I mean, somebody, I mean, or the chief executive.
I'm happy to comment on it.
Is it Annie's job to lobby local government New Zealand, or is it our job to lobby local government New Zealand?
We'll leave that. No, so look, we are engaged with local government New Zealand. It's noted in the paper that there's the Productivity Commission's review underway around local government funding more broadly, and so we are seeing this in the round, if you like, in terms of all of the pressures on local government, and whether rates as a mechanism per se are the predominantly appropriate mechanism for raising revenue for a range of the things that we do. So there's a higher order discussion underway with government on local government funding, of which this is a subset. I would note, however, that the predominant focus on the funding of tourism within local government New Zealand is on infrastructure, and it's heavily driven by the territorial authorities. For the regional sector, where most of our interactions occur, this matter is not a priority issue, and it's really because there are much more significant issues around environmental management, climate change, etc., which are the focus. But I'm happy to take away from this discussion a view that the council would like to see us more actively engage with local government New Zealand around the funding of visitor promotion or destination promotion in particular.
Well, I presume there are other regional authorities that have taken on the chore of rating for their whatever their regional entity is, and so I'm wondering in terms of the work that Trudy is identifying, if we were to move in the direction of a more demanding and targeted rate for this industry. In the past, what's been dumped in the too hard basket apparently all this time is trying to come up with a classification system that says here are the people who directly benefit, here are the people maybe the next band, here are the people in the lowest band or whatever, and we need a differential targeted rate for them. Is this something that other regional bodies or whoever is doing this rating elsewhere, are they working on that, or should we be part of some exercise to establish a methodology that would be applicable across councils?
So from what we can tell, this issue is reasonably particular to Hawke's Bay. So the concerns about funding destination promotion via the rating mechanism and as a concern for the regional sector is something which is pretty much vexing us. The issue around bed taxes, etc., is coming up in the context of funding tourism infrastructure, and so is a particular focus for territorial authorities, and you can think about the likes of Rotorua or Queenstown, or the bigger unitary authorities like Auckland and Wellington, Auckland and Wellington City. So, we've sort of put this challenge upon ourselves, really. I think in other regions they're seeing it as a relatively, minor part of the overall focus of the regional councils. Not a big deal, the rating for it and contributing to it. So we're at the pointy end of this.
So I hear the board that I now sit on asking the council if we're talking about a unified position for the region. The unified position for the region needs to reach into, if there were a fresh, a new rating mechanism, who gets the money? And it seems to me that in the mayor's forum and so forth, there was some place that has to be thrashed out, or we don't have a unified position.
So through you, Chair, can I?
Yeah, we'll make this brief.
I'll make it as brief as possible. So fundamentally 3 actions that we're pursuing at the moment. First action is continued analysis of how we can better target through our existing mechanism, or what is a more equitable way of targeting the beneficiaries of the tourism dollar. And so that's the work that we'll carry on doing in the background. A direction from the mayoral forum to, in conjunction with Hawke's Bay Tourism, to convene and lead that regional discussion, so that if a regional bed tax does become a tool that is available to us, that it is used in a reasonably aligned and joined up way, and everyone understands that. And the third action is just to maintain oversight and be reporting back to this committee around what's happening at a national level.
Thank you. On the funding issue?
Yeah, and it's one last question. So given what we've just discussed, and with your knowledge that in our last long-term plan we agreed to a funding of 1.5 million for the next 3 years, is your sense that we're going to have these mechanisms sufficiently developed and in place in another, 2.5 years' time?
Yes.
Yes? Okay.
Other questions before Councillor Graham moves? Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Paragraph 16, Hawke's Bay Tourism believes it is in a very positive space with widespread public, industry and political support. Can someone advise me where there is evidence of widespread public support?
I'll have a crack, Councillor. This was through the LTP process. This was, my understanding, the most significant. We received the most number of submissions on Hawke's Bay Tourism's funding, and the submissions were significantly in support of Hawke's Bay Tourism's funding.
There was significant support. Sorry, Chair. There was significant support from the industry, as I took it. Absolutely, I agree with you. I would disagree with it being general public support, because there was an awful lot of people arguing from the general public against what happened in the end. Against, they was arguing in favour of us reducing funding. Also through the submission process on the port, there was an awful lot of submissions that were made that commented on the number of cruise ships coming in, and the public felt that was perhaps something we need to be considering. So I would argue that saying that there is widespread public support is perhaps not quite truthful. Industry and political support, perhaps, yes, certainly industry, but I would be very careful about making those sort of comments in a paper that's going out to the general public.
So thank you, Councillor, and I just will respond to the word truthful. It's never the intention of anyone who writes a paper for this committee to not be truthful and not to provide the information that they sincerely hold to believe to be true. So I just want to comment that
truthfulness is perhaps not the right word, but certainly you've put a belief in there. I mean, and there are people in the public who believe that Rex is a shape-shifting alien. So that's only a belief, and this is certainly a belief.
So there's no single point of truth, is what you're saying.
Well, look, I think I'd comment that there's a distinction between the public's interest in funding tourism and the public support for tourism. Generally widespread support for the benefit of tourism. The argument that we were having at the time was whether or not the rates should pay for it.
Yeah. Look, I think Councillor Bailey's made his point. Councillor Barker.
Let's make the observation. It's not unusual for papers of this nature for the writers to put their own opinion in it. I took that as an opinion. There's a matter of opinion. Whether I agree with it or not.
Thanks, Councillor Barker. I think we do need to be careful in terms of our language in responding. But are there any other points do you want to make, Councillor Bailey? You got another point?
Thank you, Chair. I raised the point in the follow-ups that I had asked at the last time the Hawke's Bay Tourism gave us an update, that they provide us with an update on the living wage promotion, what they're doing around that, and I see nothing of that in this particular paper or report back from Hawke's Bay Tourism that they've even proceeded or even thought about it.
Sure. Look, I'll pose that question. Are you in a position to either report now or come back to us at your next engagement?
It's there is a comment in the paper towards the end that we are working on it, and it's part of the industry-wide survey. It's many of the industry are operating under a living wage, but we don't have an actual number of what that looks like. And obviously we had an industry update of 100 people last night, and we again advocated for it. So it's certainly an ongoing discussion, and it's work the industry association's doing as well. So it is being worked on. It's just not as simple as giving you an exact number.
If it's in your report, can you point it out to me exactly where it is?
Page 91.
Page 91,
Yeah.
councillor.
There's just a short reference to it.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Mr. Walker.
Yeah, this is about funding accountability. 20% of the body of the population of this region.
Yeah.
I'd like my answer in terms of what strategy have you got to engage with Māori, and what are the key performance indicators that you have to do so, and who are you engaging with? Because I'm the chairman of Hawke's Bay Māori Tourism, also on the New Zealand Māori Tourism Board, and I also own 2 tourism businesses in Hawke's Bay. Doesn't make me conflicted, but I'd like some answers, because at the end of the day, it's ratepayers' money, and we have to know what the value proposition is to us as Māori.
Mr. Do you want to answer that?
I think it's a really good opportunity to perhaps for you to respond to our invitation to meet with you and discuss it, which has
I've
been
had no
rejected up
formal
until now.
written invitation to meet you.
Has there been an invitation extended? There has been. And are you able to...
We have extended the invitation many times.
Not to me.
Can we do that again? Send an
Happy to.
invite out to Mr. Walker and have a really good discussion. Would you like to go to that, Mike, as well? Or anyone else?
I think he's big enough to go by himself.
Okay. Well, so can we look forward to that wonderful meeting early in the new year, perhaps? Yes. Great. Look, thank you very much. I'm sure there are no further questions, and I just want to go to page 86, where we've got the recommendation. And Councillor Graham indicated a desire to move that, and he's seconded by Councillor Belford. Councillor Graham, are you wanting to speak to your recommendation?
I do wish to speak. It was a difficult time for your team, you, Andy and George and the team, when we went through the big debate. And I do think that a lot of the public did come out and support you, and that did influence us at the time. And I think you did pick up the cudgel. You have done that. You have not gone to sleep on the job. You are now leading New Zealand in this debate. I'm really pleased that you're looking for a national solution, so thanks for that, because I hadn't thought about that until you spoke today. I mean, clearly you need a national position because we have so many national operators. So I'm really pleased with that. You have continued to get 6% growth in the industry. That's not just down to you, but you are the promotion arm, so you've got to take the credit for that. That's amazing growth. You're now the biggest financial sector in our region. I'm not sure you'd be the biggest revenue, and from a P&L point of view, but nevertheless, you're doing so well. You're actually getting some complaints now about we've got too much tourism going on. So that's quite interesting going on. On Māori tourism, Annie, I want to thank you because a couple of times I've asked you to, on personal, can you go and see the people? You've always responded, and you've done a lot of work there. I know Toro's not happy as he could be, but nevertheless, we are starting to build that, and it is a huge opportunity in Hawke's Bay to build Māori destinations, or what do you call it? There's a special name you call it.
Products and places, and yeah.
Yeah, but for people to do, and we have such great depth here, especially in Wairua and Heratonga, where we are actually really real. We are real. We have active and working marae, so and that's a treasure to us, and something that we could build on, and I'm sure we can. Just on the note, I really noted that we are, in the terms of turnover, we're not that far behind Rotorua, given that they are a tourist town. And we do apples, beef, meat, everything else as well. That's what they do. And we're just behind Taupo, so I think, you know, it's hard to look at these numbers, hard to look at the work you do, hard to look at the fact you've picked up the cudgel and see that there's any failure here. You've done a phenomenal job. And thanks, George. I'm glad that you're stuck around with us. You bring great value, and I know that Tom was bringing a different type of challenge to you. And that's great. And welcome aboard. Sorry, I forgot your name.
Dave.
We always do.
But welcome on board. And this is a great industry for Hawke's Bay, and you're doing a great job.
Councillor Balfour.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would just like to re-note that what we might as a council have seen as a expectation that Hawke's Bay Tourism was to come up with sort of a technical fix to raising this money. It emerges as equally or even more so an advocacy requirement, given that the solutions might be outside the region here and require, you know, some clear positions being taken and forcefully expressed. So there's definitely a larger advocacy role, and I think we as councillors need to make sure that we are fully engaged by that and weighing in wherever we need to on that score. We are only about, 4 months into the new fiscal year. So I think a fair amount of, an acceptable amount of ground has been covered in looking into the funding issues. So that's cool. I think the other things that we have raised as a council with Hawke's Bay Tourism involving living wage, the environment, those are things that are on the table as well, and you just can't do everything at one time. And I guess we've given the funding issue the priority for the moment to get that off the ground. The last thing would be with respect to Maori tourism. I think Hawke's Bay Tourism is really legitimately confused as to what the expectation is here. Are they expected to create a line of business where there is no consumer demand? That has to be seriously looked at. You know, people think that, oh yeah, we got X percent, you know, Maori. Well, we have, as best I can tell, 2 businesses at the moment that show any sign of being financially viable. These are businesses at the end of the day, whoever is in charge of them. And so I think we councillors need to have a discussion at some point, it's not going to happen today, as to exactly what do we expect here. Do we expect to manufacture a business out of thin air? Are we not talking to the right people? Are the right people in charge on the other side? You know, there are a lot of issues here, and as I say, you can't just say, oh, let's create a rye bread industry because somebody happens to think, you know, we have a lot of, you know, rye bread lovers out there. You know, this is a consumer-driven business at the end of the day, and if there are bright sparks out there who feel they have some opportunity they can identify in this space, they need to be identified, stand up, explain what they have in mind, and demonstrate that there is actually some business now. So one of those 2 businesses I heard yesterday, you know, why is it in place today? Because somebody worked for free, the principal worked for free for a year. You know, how many people are prepared to do that or can do that? And so we have to be kind of realistic here. It's not just serving a ball across the net here at Hawke's Bay Tourism and say, create a Maori tourism industry for us. That's not the way it's going to work.
Great, thank you, Councillor Balfour. Councillor Wilson.
Well, just on the same vein, I think a fair bit's been said, but I sort of see it as, you know, we represent all of Hawke's Bay, we're all in this together, and it's great to have an advocate in the form of Mr Walker getting behind Māori tourism. The only point I'd make, to follow up from Tom, and he sort of covered some of what I was going to say, is you need someone to invest. Businesses don't just grow out of nothing. They need investment. these guys will get the punters here if the investment happens at the other end. And I think Mr. Walker's in a fantastic position to advocate either through treaty entities or through other, hapu sort of businesses. Here's the opportunity, and here's how we're going to invest in that opportunity. And it's going to take someone to actually get the chequebook out at the end of the day. It's not Hawke's Bay Tourism's role to get the chequebook out, to create the business, but you get the business, they will get the punters here. That's what they do. They've demonstrated that in spades in the last 5-7 years. So.
Thank you. Point to
Kia ora.
Mr. Walker, you want?
Yeah, I think there's a problem with the mindset here. Two Māori tourism businesses. I own two myself. I've been going since 2000, and they're very successful. One's an international one, one's a local one. So, and you go all around, there's heaps of Māori tourism businesses, and a lot of them are not recognised, and some of them bring a lot of people into this region. Like the Iron Māori thing, like the Matatini, all these things, there's lots of, and there's, you walk through the whole Hawke's Bay, it's just that there's no connection between the status quo and the Māori operators, and I've looked at my my emails. I've had 4 emails from Andy Dundas since 2016. So that's the cooperation that I see. Is I think we can do better. And what I'd like to see is what's the strategy to. I've never asked Hawke's Bay Tourism for $1 for my business, and many Māori haven't. So what's the value proposition? That's what I want to know. Because ratepayers' money.
Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to take the opportunity to just say thank you, Annie, for starting the discussion around the living wage. I think the survey is a great way to start. It'd be better to know what's going on out there. So thank you for doing that. I look forward to seeing the results that come through from that. And I'm also pleased with the progress that's been made on the self-funding issue. The only other thing I'd say, Chair, is I do think that at some stage, as a council, we need to take a strategic look at just how much tourism is too much tourism for Hawke's Bay. I think there is some bite back in the community around the amount of cruise ships that are coming in. Whether that's because there's an infrastructure issue in terms of coping with that, or whether that's because people just generally get upset about the number of people in town, I couldn't say. But I certainly think at some stage in the future it's something we need to have a think about.
Thank you, Councillor Bailey. I'll finish up with, on behalf. I've got Councillor Barker. Sorry,
thank you. I'd make a couple of small comments. Firstly, the world is awash with tourists. Awash with tourists. There's reports of Barcelona shutting down, people in Vienna, Venice, other places, people I know who've been to Prague 20 years ago. So the city's just changed dramatically. You can't get some of the sites that you used to be able to get near just because of the number of visitors. So we have the world awash with visitors. So there's going to be some issues flow out of it. The second point I'd make is that the world's facing severe problems on climate change. And if we think we're going to avoid climate change by just saying we believe in it and changing none of our behaviour, then it's not going to happen. There are Trump deniers, and there are those who accept it but do nothing. And I think the challenge for us here in this region is to get ourselves to a position where we don't suffer the backlash on being overwhelmed by the number of tourists coming here, because you can get too much of a good thing. And secondly, to be able to put our tourism industry into a position where we can say with genuineness that we are environmentally sustainable in the long term. And I haven't heard those words come out, or that strategy come out yet, because that will be the marker. Just read the reports on the reaction around the world to being overwhelmed by tourists, and it's growing and will continue to grow. So I think we need to have a bit more future focus on that.
Thank you, councillors. And just to finish off on behalf of Councillor Graham, I'd just like to say The results speak for themselves. The Hawke's Bay Tourism does a tremendous job in getting people to the region, and we congratulate you on that. We'd also like you to stop the ships coming in. We'd like you to solve our industrial relations, and we want you to solve Maori tourism. What else do we want you to do?
Climate change.
Climate change as well. If you could sort climate change out, that would be very useful.
Rick's been a shape-shifting alien.
So look, on behalf of council,
That's great.
order, please. I'm speaking with Councillor Barker. Councillor Barker, I'd like to thank you for your work over the past year. There are some significant challenges around the funding, we know, and I think given the fact that we'd constrained your revenue line substantially, you have every right to push back on the parallel piece of work around collaboration to central government and to ask or to seek resources from council for that part of the advocacy work. That wouldn't be unreasonable, so it'd be interesting to see your response to that. So we've got a lot of challenges over the next quarter, and we'll look forward to next year's efforts. So thank you for your work, and all the best for the Christmas and New Year period to you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and could I just thank you, Chairman, and the rest of the committee for your support this year. I think we've come through it well. We're all in positive space, and thank you for the last list of challenges that you've just given us, and we'll report on those again next year.
So, councillors, we've got our recommendation to receive and note the report. All those in favour will say aye. Aye. Those against will say no. Thank you all for coming along, and that took us an hour. I hope each item doesn't roll into that. Thank you very much, George. Happy travels. Thank you, Dave, for coming along.
Explain the situation. You can either lend it or you can...
Councillors, if we can revert back to the agenda, and we go back to item 6, which is the bus service update. And you're going to give us your words of wisdom on that. That's on page 9.
What else do you want me to say? I went to Rohuri with the Hawke's Bay Tourism.
Thank you, Mr Chair. In view of your request, I won't go through the item. The only thing I would like to add is to say that we do have our standalone...
Excuse me, one moment. We just have a bit of order, please. Sorry.
Just to add to something that's not in the report, to say that we do have our standalone Go Bay bus website now operational. It seems to be working well. There's journey planning facilities on it, so we see that as a great improvement. But we'll take any feedback if anybody wants to give it a go and point out anything else that should be on there. It'll always be a moving feast. So I'll just take any questions on the...
Thank you, Anne. Councillor Dick.
Thanks, Anne. Good report. However, I'd just like you to acknowledge, perhaps, that some things have changed since the report was first written, and the most significant issue in my mind is that, in fact, over the last 3 months, oil prices have fallen by around about 35% internationally, driven by shale oil extracted by fracking in the United States, which has built up supply significantly, and some decrease in demand. And so it appears likely that petrol at the pump may come down below $2 a litre, which is going to have a negative impact, certainly if we put prices up. In my mind, it's a very volatile situation, and it may not last. OPEC are pulling back on production, and the shale oil producers, in fact, just can't make any money unless they're getting at least $60 a barrel. So would you like to comment on that and its implications?
Thank you. Yes, it's certainly, I mean, oil prices are a double-edged sword for public transport, because if fuel prices go down, patronage declines, but also the cost of operating the service declines. So that's a positive for us, but the loss of patronage is a negative. So I guess, as you'll see in the recommendation to the report, we're not recommending any change to fares at the moment. And that's because there is usually an effect on patronage when you do that. Whether that's temporary, it is a very complex situation, and people really do weigh up the cost of driving versus the cost of taking the bus, particularly if it's something they have to make a little effort to do. So, you know, certainly we provide a good service for people who need it, who don't have other options, but we are also trying to attract people who do have other options. And that's always the balancing act.
Thank you. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the paper. I appreciate the arguments that are in it. And you spoke a lot about the pricing, ticket pricing affecting patronage and so on, and the different reasons for that, which is really cool. The other part that gets thrown into that, I think, would be the actual routes that are taken. So I assume part of the transport review is that there will be a revisiting of routes. For example, having a bus service out to the airport, which I think is one of those things that we should be looking at seriously.
Certainly, there's quite a review of routes going on, not only new destinations, but also places that we're running to that are not being well patronised, and why not, and length of route. And you'll see that travel time was one of the things that people not complained about, but were less positive about. If we can streamline services in some way, then sometimes we can redivert that extra cost, because every kilometre run costs us about $1.80. And so we can make those variations to the contract, then we can put that money into new services or rejigging services to better provide what's needed.
Okay. And just a further question, Chair. You spoke in one of the surveys you did about people complaining about travel, the travel time being a concern for them. Would that have been taken during the time that the Pakawai Road roundabout works was being undertaken, which has obviously now since passed?
Yes, but we are still suffering a little with travel times between Napier and Hastings, and that's at peak times, particularly around Hastings. It's very clogged.
Okay. And
it's not only related to the roadworks. Certainly was a big issue while they were happening.
Yep.
Councillor Bevan.
Thank you, Chair. So I have to say I found this report quite confusing, because I've sat here for several years under the misapprehension, it seems, that as petrol prices went up, people would use the bus service because it would cost them more to drive their cars. We have the highest petrol prices in the history of this country, but a declining usage on the bus service. So there's a mismatch there that I cannot get my head around. Put that aside for a moment. I noted with interest the comments you made about the promotional work you did with DHB staff, and that's maybe a pointer to where we need to go in the future with this. Have you considered other major employment hubs that might be targeted in a similar way?
Yes, we presented an early draft of the public transport plan to the RTC for comment last week, and that is one of the key things that we will be working on, and we've made a small step with a trial service for the HBRC staff, DHB, and there are others in the pipeline. Certainly. Just, Councillor Bevan, if I could just comment on your first comment. There's always a lag in the time it takes to see those increases, and there are other influences as well. So we've got a booming job market at the moment in Hawke's Bay. We believe that the decline in actual passenger numbers, well, it's clear from our ticketing breakdowns that the decline in actual passenger numbers is happening on the shorter routes, and that we think is related to people now in work and running cars. The longer routes, petrol prices, we are we were seeing an influence there, and hopefully that will continue. So actually, overall, the passenger kilometres, which is the average distance travelled by each passenger, is up. So, so in terms of reduction of emissions and so on, that's a positive. But if you just look at boardings, they are not increasing because of that influence from the shorter routes.
So,
sorry, we've got
sorry,
short one, very brief.
It is very brief. So I was just going to say, with your new card system, it actually gives you an opportunity to survey the actual user.
Yes.
And that's going to be really helpful information, I'm sure.
Yes.
Thanks, Councillor Bevan. I've got 3 questions here in a row. 3 Musketeers. Tom Belford, please.
With your comment about the GoBay website, it triggered 2 questions, really. One, is there a calculator, or could there be a calculator tool on that site that let people easily see sort of the value proposition? You tap in what you know, the various inputs, and see a comparison that said it's cheaper for you to take the bus than drive your car, and here's the savings per month or whatever. Is there a tool like that that could be conceived? And second is, you note in here that dissatisfaction is mostly caused by service delay. Same thing. Is there, if you have an app that you can have on your phone, do we track buses by GPS, and is there a tool available that says, okay, it's only 5 minutes away? Because I think anxiety about getting to where I need to be and the time I need to be there is a factor, and if you could relieve that angst, there might be more usage as well.
Through again, Mr. Chair, that is definitely coming as the second stage. The ticketing system will be in place by April, and after that, we are working. The consortium of 9 regional councils is working with the ticketing company and NZTA, who are going to provide some aspect of the technology for everybody to have that real-time information. It does have GPS, but there's a software component that has to be developed to go with that.
And what about the calculator?
And the calculator, it's a good idea. Hadn't thought of that. We'll talk with the web developers and see what we can do.
Councillor Barker.
I'm not one of the 3 Musketeers, I'm D'Artagnan. Can I just... I'm D'Artagnan.
That's nice. Can I just make the first observation? I think your analysis, because I went through these figures, I thought your analysis is right, that the actual drop-off is people getting into employment, and then because they've got employment, they're going to have to get cars and get transport to other things, and public transport just doesn't suit a lot of that, so I think that's quite right. Just looking at the figures here, I can't quite figure out how the gold cards, the DHB and those other things, how are they influencing these figures over time? If so, how are they? Or is the analysis we've got here neutral on them?
Sorry, I didn't quite understand. So in terms of proportion of...
Yeah, so when we get to the trips, we get gold card holders and so on,
yes.
And we get free trips for the DH to the hospital and so on. Are those figures taken into account? We've got all the numbers travelling, so everybody gets on and presents a gold card. Is that clicked somewhere? Is that taken?
Yes. Yes.
So the driver counts that?
Yes.
And it's counted as a trip?
Yes.
Okay. I haven't seen them actually do the count.
Oh no, they do. Every passenger has to have a ticket issued, and that if the Super Gold person will have a ticket that says Super Gold.
Oh, it's issue them with a ticket. Okay.
Even though there's no money changing hands.
Mr. Walker.
Question has been answered.
Thank you. Mr. Puckett.
Kia ora. My question's in a similar vein about earlier presentation. I know it has been raised in the past, and it's in regards to the living wage. I know that this subject has come to the table numerous times, especially within the industry around our drivers, and we've seen the actual lowering of the hourly rate. What work has gone into actually starting to reverse this?
Through Mr. Chair, this has been discussed, I think, through Audit and Risk Committee quite extensively. There is a national review of the public transport operating model, which we were all required to contract under. I believe there's something due out from that shortly. The Minister of Transport ordered that review. and we are awaiting the result of that.
Thank you. Councillors or committee, we've got recommendations on page 15, bottom of page 15.
I'll move.
We've got a mover, Councillor Dick. Thank you for that. Seconded, Councillor Barker. Do you wish to speak, Councillor Dick? Councillor Barker? Yeah. Look, I just wanted to make this comment that the recommendations include an agreement to maintain bus fares, the fares at the current levels till November 2019, and it's based on a very good commentary from Ms Redgrave, and I just comment that the confidence this committee and the council has in the staff we've got dealing with these issues. Excuse the pun, the transport area's got a lot of moving parts, and we are confident that they are being very well managed and oiled at all times. So thank you, Ms Redgrave, and all the best for the coming season.
Thank you, Chair.
On that note, we've got the recommendations. All those in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Those against will say no. It's carried. Thanks, Anne. That's lovely. Councillors, we've got a lot of work still to do. It's just after, it's nearly 20 past. So we'll move on to agenda item 7, which is the amendment to Treasury policy investment. 17. Are you taking through this,
I
Jess?
can. Manton's going to come up to the front and take us
Surely
through
this
any
could be taken
questions.
as read.
Yeah.
But I think this is fairly,
Yes.
fairly minor amendments.
I'm
to
actually
the-
struggling to see why we've got the
Cyber?
paper in front of us.
Yes.
Well, it needs your
There's
approval.
some important issues here.
It's an amendment to the Treasury policy.
So is that a move, Councillor Barker?
I move.
Yes.
Second.
Thank you.
Right.
No discussion on
Yes,
manager
I-
versus managers.
I have.
Sorry, Councillor, I wasn't.
Well, I
wasn't
think this is quite important, actually.
Do you want to come back, Manton, please?
Very important.
Yeah.
We've done it.
It's an important issue, and there are a lot in it, but we had traversed this significantly before. Councillor Hewitt, can you raise your issues, please?
Jess, I just think when we have the Treasury policy on page 54, and we've got the description of our assets, that we, under the forestry description, we should be including the carbon credits, because obviously they're of some value. 14.3.
That's a good point. We can make that amendment.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions before we move to the recommendation for Manton or Jess? There being none. We've got a mover and a seconder. Who was the mover? Sorry, I missed that.
Me.
Councillor Barker, and was seconded.
It's with the amendment.
Yes.
Oh, with the amendment?
Small amendment,
Small amendment there?
to page 54.
Who was seconding that, please?
I was.
Councillor Graham. So we've got a
I
mover.
accept the amendment.
Thank you.
Got a mover and a seconder, and a recommendation to adopt the amended Statement of Investment Objectives and Treasury Policy as proposed, and recommend that to Council. That's on page 17. Any discussion on that? Councillor Barker, do you wish to speak?
No, I just want to get on with the job. You've been exhorting us all day to get on with the job, and I'm trying to get on with it, and you're
None.
holding me back.
Any other speakers?
I want to vote.
So we've got the recommendations 1 and 2. All those in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Those against will say no. Carried. We'll move to agenda item 8, which is the Regional 3 Waters Review on page 73. Who's going to talk to us about that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll just
Thanks, Chris.
point out the key points. So, look, this is a relatively small issue from a financial perspective, but really seeking approval to work with the Region's 4 territorial authorities to really look at options in the management of 3 waters, so that's drinking water, stormwater and wastewater. The Hawke's Bay Regional Council assets of drainage and flood mitigation are not in the scope of this review. And the review's recommendations will end up guiding central government's current review of 3 waters strategy. And central government is advising that they're really looking to identify options towards the tail end of 2019. It's also noting that this review is specifically looking at the service delivery function of Three Waters and does not seek to review the regulatory framework. The reason it's important to us is I've previously stated that it's not looking at our service delivery functions, but we do have a lot of interfaces with the territorial authorities, particularly in the stormwater area of the networks. And it's also a good idea because we are also a regulator and natural resources manager that we keep informed as to the nature of those discussions. So the plan is that we contribute around 15% of the cost of this review. That would be done by external consultants, so that is of the order of around $30,000, and we can fund it from existing budgets. So really today we're looking for Council to confirm its support for Hawke's Bay Regional Council to participate in this review and acknowledge the funding required to do that.
Good questions?
Yep.
Councillor Belford and then Councillor Barker.
Do you, at this point, can you identify any conflicts in the direction of travel that the government is looking to take versus where we might want to be, or and so is that what this is about, and what might some of those issues be?
Yep.
And secondly, within our own community, same question, are you expecting there to be any trajectory of debate here that puts us at odds with our territorial partners?
So I think in terms of central government direction, I think it's a good idea for us to participate with our territorial authorities in shaping a view. I don't think central government has made any firm decisions. I don't think there's any potential area of conflict. The Minister has indicated that she's interested in the review and the outcomes of that review, and so are some of the other regions in New Zealand.
If I may interject, I thought I've read that the alarm being expressed by the local government community that things like privatization might be in the cards and so forth.
Yeah. Can I perhaps comment to that? So the government has ruled out privatisation. What it has got on the table that is causing alarm is structural reform that would aggregate Three Waters into single entities that might actually span multiple regions. So the Minister has put up as sort of a straw man the possibility of there being as little as sort of 5 water administrators, which is the Scottish model, for example, where the whole of Scotland is one company, but it would be a publicly owned company structure. So partly what's going on here is that the government's got all options on the table, which is causing some angst, and what we're looking at is a more narrow option that retains regional collaboration and doesn't go the next step, which is pan-regional.
Councillor Barker?
I've come down to a more lowly level question than the Tom. I was just curious, there's no explanation as to how the 35, 35, 15, 7, 7.5 split was made. I'd have thought that would have been something that should have been explained. How did you get to that figure? I got no idea. Did you throw darts? Did you have an arm wrestling? So I just think it would be helpful if you put those things in to explain how you got to them in future papers. Yep. And the second question is on 2.2.3, the recommendations. HBRIC's funding contribution come from the drainage and river controls consultancy budget. I just would like someone to explain how that's an appropriate budget. Do we have authority to do that?
Well, look, with respect to the interface between our drainage network and the stormwater network, there is a direct relationship between that area of council expenditure and this. I mean, we've also got regulatory interests in this as well. Of the available funding mechanisms, it is the most appropriate that we have available for this purpose, noting that in the long-term plan, annual plan, we did not at that time foresee this project, and we didn't have a dedicated budget for this purpose.
With respect, you haven't answered the first question. How do we get the 15?
So can answer that.
I understand we have all these connections and interfaces.
No, Councillor, I thought you were asking that in future papers would explain where we arrived at, but in answer to your specific question, relatively arbitrary, taking into account two factors. One is ability to pay, so you'll see the smaller contributions from Central Hawke's Bay and Wairoa and the smaller quantum of assets as part of this review. Our 15 is a combination of us having a greater ability to pay than Wairoa CHB, but having a smaller overall interest in this relative to Napier and Hastings.
So it's a negotiation.
Indeed.
And you're just saying that this is the only fund we can take the money out because we haven't got approval for anywhere else.
So it's the most appropriate fund.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Coming back to 11.2 and this issue of privatisation, which you spoke about there, James. I'm a little confused then about the wording in the final sentence where it says the models must be flexible enough to future-proof the inclusion of private water supplies. Are you talking about water supplies are actually council-controlled CCOs or...?
No, that's a reference to the existing private suppliers in subdivisions, for example. There are farm parks around that have private infrastructure that's privately owned. So this is not about private provision of currently provided public infrastructure. It's about a model that can include those different supplies.
Okay, yeah, I understand that. It was just that, again, that's a thing for saving angst in the community.
Understood.
Councillor Bevan.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of quick questions. So just going back to the point that Councillor Barker raised regarding the percentage split of the cost of this, that's been agreed by everybody?
Yep, so there's an agreement. Yep.
Okay. So my other question was, I was slightly surprised in paragraph 11 here, where you go through what the review is going to consist of, that there is not a review of the current allocation model for water, given that we now know it's an incredibly scarce resource, and given that the current allocation model is basically first come, first served, which we now know serves us badly. I'm quite surprised that that's not on your radar, and that we wouldn't be looking at some sort of
Very good question.
priority allocation of future, water availability.
So happy to take that comment on board. I think the thrust is really around service delivery under the existing consenting regime, but I think it's a valid point that we can raise within that team.
I would note that as I think you would well understand, Councillor, that is a can of worms which is rather large, and it's tied up with very large policy considerations that central government's currently considering, and it is largely the domain of the regional council as opposed to the territorial authorities. So,
nonetheless, it's a can we need to open.
And look, I would suggest that if there is a desire to look more at that question, and obviously there are significant legislative constraints to our freedom to operate around that, but if that's something we want to look at, that we would do that as a separate piece of work, because it would run the risk of bogging down, which, as Chris said, is a service delivery focused piece of work.
Any other questions? Councillor Belford.
Yeah, may I assume that we'll be informed as the whatever the policy direction is that's developed here, that we hear about it, because my concern is that the territorial authorities will be determined to protect the status quo, and that there may be all sorts of reasons for considering a different form of managing the infrastructure that supplies our water, regional authorities, whatever that might be. And I would hope that would be our view in this process, is that we're open to any kind of rationalization of the process that results in this infrastructure being better supplied in a more timely manner and to common standards, so that people in Napier aren't getting black water and people in Hastings aren't getting green water. So I don't want to see us having a knee-jerk reaction that local government New Zealand believes, therefore we believe, or Hastings and Napier believe, therefore we believe. And so I'm hoping that we will be fully engaged in protecting the public good in this process.
Yeah.
That's a question. Will we?
Yeah.
Questions normally start with a question word, Tom.
So, Councillor, I think that's
May I assume?
that's part of the reason we want to be involved, is to be able to have those sorts of conversations. We will be bringing the work back to this forum at appropriate points in time. And I'll probably also comment that part of the study is to actually look at addressing the government's concerns. That's a primary outcome of the study, rather than defending the status quo situation. So it's specifically around addressing the concerns of government around scale, costs, standards and capacity.
Councillor Bucket.
Just one quick question. How long do you think this process is going to take to come to a conclusion?
So just to clarify, Councillor, this particular study or the government's review of...
This particular study and the government's review, I mean, are we on a slow boat to China here, or are we
well, this
fast jet?
This piece is aimed for completion by June, so the first 6 months of next year. The government's timetable is somewhat more ambiguous, so they are issuing a discussion document, and they are focusing on drinking water in the short term. I think it's unlikely that there will be government reform this side of the next local body elections, next central government elections. I think they will take some proposals into 2020 and probably need to campaign on those. That's my expectation. This is very, very difficult territory because these assets don't belong to the Crown at all. They're not owned by the Crown, and the Crown is seeking to reorganise the assets of local government, which is always a fraught area.
I would have thought a very tricky ground to cross.
Indeed. Councillors, I've got a couple of questions of my own, Chris. I think we just need to sharpen up a bit as to the facts of that, and Councillor Barker touched on the progress of this, but I don't know the dollars involved.
In terms of the funding that we're asking for, it's only $30,000 that we're contributing to this.
$30,000? So the total project value is what?
Is around 200. So
200,000?
Yeah.
Is it around or at 200,000?
That's the budget. We haven't finalised a process to engage a consultant, so the exact figure will be known when that process is complete.
Okay.
But the budget figure is around 200,000.
The other element to this is it's coming from the Drainage River Consultant Services. What are you not doing in that budget now that you've...
So we've reviewed that budget, and in my view there's sufficient capacity to carry out this work.
So it was oversubscribed, is that you're saying?
I'd say there's a notional amount put aside on every year because it is dealing with issues as they crop up throughout the year.
Can I suggest to the finance manager that we move on from notional budgeting to more reality around that, so that we're clear on what we are approving when we go through a budgeting process. And I'd also like to, when we come back with this item back to council for final approval, that we do have the dollars in there to break down as to what's going on, where it's coming from, what's happening. Any other issues there? We've got a mover for Councillor Wilson's moving, seconded Councillor Bailey. Any issues you want to raise there, Councillor? Pretty straightforward. The only comment I'd make, I probably have a disagreement with staff that this is a minor issue for Regional Council. I think we're a major stakeholder in reality, and the likes of the Havelock North Water scenario highlight the significance of it to us. Stormwater discharges into the estuary are another example of where we're intimately involved. So very pleased to see us there, but I'd hate to see council staff repeat the notion that this is not important to us or is of a lesser significance. We need to be there, bells and all.
Well said, Chair.
Any other comment? Councillor Wilson,
Just
sorry.
summing up, Chair, be careful what you wish for. If this is our major item, will be up for 200k. The people that watch the video, at least 4 of them are councils.
Point taken, Councillor. Any other comment? We've got a mover and a seconder. All those in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Those against will say no. Carried. We're up to morning tea time, so we'll take a break here for a quarter of an hour. A strict break, quarter of an hour only. Starting there at 10 to.